All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some properties and see why it's so important to maintain consistency with your final images for real estate and architectural photography. So I'm just here in Adobe Bridge, and we're just going to go through a bunch of photos and final images from properties that I finished editing. These are pretty recent, so we're just going to kind of go through these, kind of talk about why it's important that they all look the same. So this is all the same property, but as you can see, they're pretty consistent in the fact that they all basically have the same characteristics, right? You can tell that it's one person editing these photos, which is really what you want to go for. You don't want to have your images look like they were edited by multiple people and have a different overall style or different characteristics and things like that. So we can compare these living room, family room shots with these ones, this one over here, and we can see that they're pretty much identical. I try to make the outsides look identical. I try to make the interiors look identical. What I'm going for when I edit these photos is I want things to be bright and even and basically perfect throughout. I want to be able to do everything I can to make sure that the images really stand out and that the interiors and the furnishings, the decorations, things like that are highlighted, because at the end of the day, the real estate agents and the clients are really hiring us to help sell their homes and, put it on the market and sell it as fast as possible. That's why they get in contact with us. And that's why we do that's kind of what we're offering to them, right? We're basically just helping to sell the home. So you want to do everything you can to make sure that it looks great. So when I say that I try to make everything as bright and even as possible, I mean specifically, I try to get rid of dark corners, say in the top, right, left, and bottom. I try to make sure that there's no vignetting or dark corners or anything like that. You don't want to have something look stylized. You're not trying to go for something necessarily artistic, right? You're not applying different filters and different things like that, right? It's not something that you're putting on Instagram. It's something that needs to be crystal clear and even throughout. So that's why it's really important to maintain that consistency. But it's very difficult to get a consistent result sometimes, specifically when it comes to the outside, because typically you're going to be getting different angles of the same room sometimes, right? Like with this living room, I'll compare this one to this one, right? We have two different angles, so sometimes it'll be difficult to get the exact same result with the outside exterior view because you're at a different angle. One shot may have the photographer way over here on the right-hand side, and then this one could be over here on the left-hand side. And when the photographer is over here on the right-hand side, he could be facing the sun, which will result in a very different look for the outside exterior. Whereas if he's not facing the sun, like this image where he's on the left-hand side, where his tripod is positioned, we're not facing the sun. Therefore, we're going to be able to get good visibility with the sky and the ocean and things like that. So it can be difficult depending on the angle, but just as a general rule, try to make everything look the same, without really exaggerating the overall look. Try to make things as clean and consistent and professional as possible and things like that. But these are a bunch of day shots. But as you can see, here's another shot of that living room, and this is a really difficult image to edit. Really difficult image to edit because there's so many windows. There's these lights over here. There's this plant over here, which I didn't get the tips over here. I forgot to mask this in. But this was a massive, massive property. I think there was like 60 shots total. It's like a multi-million-dollar high-rise or something, And I think it took like 2 or 3 full days of editing to get through the entire thing. So there's going to be times where I don't see small details. Like it looks like there's a lizard or some sort of thing on the window over here that I didn't catch. And that's going to happen when you're in a rush and you're really pressed for time. You're going to miss small details sometimes. But one thing that I try to never miss is, like I said earlier, making things consistent. No matter how good I make the property look, I'm always achieving and aiming for that consistent look. They all pretty much look the same, right? The contrast, the brightness when it comes to the interior and exterior. You don't want to have things nice and even inside and then have an exterior that's dark, right? Unless it's a nighttime shot or maybe dusk or sunset, and that's the kind of shot that you're going for, right? If you're doing a night shot or something like that, then you're going to want to make sure that it does look like a night shot, right? We'll move on to these night shot, dusk, sunset, exterior shots right here. Right, so if I continue to crank up the brightness on the interior, it'll really start to lose the idea that it's a nighttime shot, and that's not what you want to do, right? So you want to be able to maintain that balance of brightness in accordance with what kind of shot it is. If it's a day shot, make sure that it looks like a day shot. If it's a night shot, make sure that you're capturing the idea that it is in fact a night shot, But with these two, I think this illustrates the concept of consistency that I keep talking about, right? We can look at these two images, and they're pretty similar. This one too. Especially these two, they're very similar. I tried to make the skies look pretty much identical. I'll composite 3 or 4 images together, and then I'll do my masking, make selections and bring in the exterior. And then if it's a nice nighttime sunset shot, I'll typically add some pinks and purples to the sky to kind of give it this cotton candy look. That's kind of something that I usually do to try to make it pop and to give it a little bit more color, right? If the exterior, if the sunset or the exterior view shots in general are a little flat and dull, don't be afraid to go in there and kind of make things pop by doing something that's artificial, like adding a color that wasn't there before. Just make sure that it's done in a professional manner and you're not over exaggerating it to the point where it looks ridiculous and fake. That's something that you definitely want to avoid. Have your images look professional. You don't want to have some silly HDR looking quality to them. You want to have them look pristine. That's why I always say that you should be using a high quality DSLR and things like that. That way you can have a lot of room to work with when you're editing them in Photoshop or Affinity Pro or whatever program that you're using and stuff like that. So here's another good example. Again, I wish I had more time to edit these photos before I had sent these out to the client, but I just didn't have that much time, and it was a massive property. I wish I could have brightened the left-hand side up just a tad and maybe done a little bit better of a job with the white balance on the right-hand side and kind of on the ceilings, but overall, these look decent. I think the property overall, with the time that I had, it came out good. And I'm sure that the agent and the homeowner were satisfied with it. This particular image is a pretty good example of how I try to brighten things up, but I'm also aware of that fine line that you can easily go over if you make things too bright and things like that. So this is a nighttime shot, but even though it's a nighttime shot, I don't want it to be dark, dull, flat, and boring. I really try to make things come alive with my editing and post-production and Photoshop for these photographs and things like that. So one thing that I'll typically do is just do my typical editing, process to the images, but sometimes they'll still look flat and dull. So for this particular image, I just made a quick selection around the picture frames, and I cranked up the brightness and contrast to make these pop out a little bit more with an adjustment layer, and then I brushed in that existing adjustment layer into the surrounding area with a soft brush. So I just made a selection around here, cranked up the brightness and contrast a little bit, and then painted in that existing adjustment layer into the right and left hand side, and it really helps to make the image come alive. But I don't want to go too far and make it look ridiculously bright, because again, it is a nighttime shot, and I think I was approaching that line and possibly going over it with this particular image, but I think it still looks okay, and it definitely looks better than it did before I selected the picture frames and used those adjustment layers and things like that. So when it comes to nighttime shots, you really do have to be careful of just how bright you make the interiors, because you do still want it to look like it's a nighttime shot and things like that. But at the same time, you don't want them to be overly dark and boring and flat and dull, as I keep saying. There's that fine line, and with most people, it's going to take a trial and error to really understand it and to get it right. It took me a long time to really kind of nail the interior nighttime shots, because it can be a delicate balance, right? Because it's not like you're dealing with daytime shots and you can just, go crazy with the brightness and things like that. But for this image, I wish I could have removed that on the ceiling and then popped in a brightness and contrast adjustment layer and just kind of painted that in over here on the right hand side, because it's looking a little flat and a little bit dark, but overall these look decent. Yeah, with this one, I wish I could have added a little bit of greens to this. It is a little bit purple, but at the end of the day, as I always say, it really does come down to time, time management and how much time you have to really edit each image and each property. But what I'm really trying to hammer home in this video is consistency. Make your images consistent, right? Here's a great example of how I was able to achieve that consistency with these photographs. This is a theater, and you can see that they basically look identical, right? The characteristics of each shot are basically identical. The brightness and the contrast, the overall amount of contrast is basically the same. The colors are the same. The white balance is basically the same. I mean, even the TV image and the overall brightness that it has is basically the same, And I'm not saying that these two images are necessarily perfect. I don't think they are by any means, but I think it's safe and it's good enough, and it maintains that consistent balance that I always try to achieve with every property that I edit. It can be very difficult to balance the woods and to really bring those out. The wood materials I found over the years are typically the most difficult material to really make pop and crunch with the contrast properly. It's difficult to balance the overall contrast and the colors of them. Right? I wish for this image I could have made the floor pop a little bit more, but again, it really comes down to time. And one thing that you want to be careful of is not going overboard with your editing. You'll edit these photos for 10, 20, 30, sometimes 45 minutes, and you want to keep making those edits and improving the image. But at a certain point, it starts to become really easy to go overboard and make the image look worse by continuing to edit. So just be aware of that fact, and just be aware of that, and try to know where that line is and where you should draw it when it comes to when you should stop making the edits and just settling on a safe point, right? It's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to these, because it is easy to go overboard and make things maybe too bright or add too much contrast, go too crazy with the skies and things like that. So I always say go just try, if you're unsure, just go for a safe middle point, right? You don't want to go into the extreme or leave things on the low end, right? Like go for something neutral. Go for something that you know is safe, you know? But again, this is a pretty difficult property to edit. I tried to add a little bit of purples and pinks to this shot right here. And this shot was, these particular shots were so difficult because of these plants right here. And I think I actually included the leaves themselves in my mask because it would have taken so much longer to physically trace out each individual leaf, right? I mean, it'd probably take me like a solid 10 minutes if I didn't include it. So what I did, I just basically traced out my path, starting over here, made my way over here, excluded the lamp, included this square window, and then just all I basically had to do was trace out the window frame, the white window frame, and include the plant leaves themselves. But as you can see, it made the leaves dark, which is not a good look. If I had more time, I would have excluded the plant leaves so that they were nice and bright, and it would make the image pop more, but I just didn't have that time. So I had to basically include them and just exclude the window frame, because that would have taken so much more time, because it's not like I just had this one image to do. I had several images to do, and it looks like I even forgot to come in here and clean up the metal pole of that lamp right there. But these are the small details that I'm talking about when it comes to time. I mean, I've been doing this for over 10 years, and even I still will forget to do things because I'm in such a rush when it comes to these images. Again, I forgot to include the tips of this orchid flower plant over here, whatever this is. And, you can get away with it because these are at a distance when the agents are viewing these on the website, on a virtual tour or whatever. But for me, it's unacceptable because I can easily come in here and see how that was not edited properly. The same with this over here with the metal, the lamp pole. To me, as a professional, that's unacceptable. But these are things that are just going to happen sometimes, So as a general rule, just try to do the best job that you can with the time that you have, and make things as consistent as possible. Make it look like it was edited by one person, right? And try to be the best at what you're doing. That way they all really come out and look excellent, If you're not hearing anything from the agents, then chances are you're doing a good job. Most of the time when we get feedback from the clients or the homeowners, it's because they're unhappy with something, which is very rare. It's also very rare that we hear back something complimentary, but it does happen. And usually when we hear back things that are compliments, they're usually like jumping up and down with joy, and they can't believe how good the images came out, But that's typically for, multi-million-dollar homes, like huge condos on the beach that are like $10 million or something, So it's rare that we get feedback, but when we do, it's generally negative, which again is pretty rare. But looking at this one, this is a condo shot. And again, just looking at this, I forgot to remove this. Again, this is the kind of stuff that's going to happen sometimes. And I had to do a quick sky replacement on this one, and I still forgot to remove that. It's because my attention is so focused on the image as a whole that the small details sometimes get completely lost in the process of editing these photos, But I think with this one, I did a decent job at making it look consistent. This was a pretty crappy day outside. The skies were completely covered. It's really overcast. It looks like garbage outside. So it's difficult to really make the skies and exteriors look good. Another thing that I forgot to do was come in here and make a selection and just take down the brightness on the on that table there. And of course, they're going to want, all this crap removed, which I'm not doing that. This would literally take like 45 minutes to remove all this garbage, all the wires and the PC at the bottom and all that crap. I'm not doing it unless they request it, because that's way too much time. But for such a crappy day out, I think these look okay. Again, they're safe, right? They're not going over that fine line into an area where it becomes unacceptable, right? They're bright, they're even, there's a good amount of contrast, there's a decent white balance here, they're sharp, they're crisp, they're ready to be sent out to the client, and always make sure that you're removing any reflections of the photographers and stuff like that. Typically, I don't have that much time to really remove them 100%. So if you can really just minimize the photographer and make it look like it's a reflection of something else, typically that's acceptable, But always make sure that you're removing the photographers and things like that from any kind of reflections, especially in the bathrooms and stuff like that. But a quick point about exteriors and masking and just bringing in your windows and stuff like that. If I had all the time in the world, I would have done a much better job with this. But for this particular image, the only thing that I really had time to do was make quick paths, right? Quick selections around these very basic primitive shapes, because I have like 5 other jobs that have to be edited. But if I had more time, I would do the same thing. I would mask all these out, but then I would come in between the blind areas one by one and make selections. And this could take easily like an hour if you really wanted to edit this whole shot and actually make it look good, like way better than this. This looks like crap to me, to be honest, because it's a quick solution to a somewhat complex problem, in the fact that when we just bring in the main area window, what we end up with is dark. We end up with a dark lanai out here on the patio outside. We end up with a dark, kind of yellowish, really unsatisfactory look to it, right? Because it's not like we're just getting the ocean and the sky. We also are bringing in the kind of the window frame and the patio area. And we're bringing in this stucco texture kind of thing, right? And it's really, really dark. So if I had all the time in the world, I would make that initial mask, and then I would come in here and then go to town, which obviously you can see. I mean, that would be, I don't even know, probably 100. I don't know, 150 individual little selections or something, But if I did that, I'd be able to increase the brightness of the ceiling and the patio area, and then take down the brightness for the skies themselves. That way they're more visible, and then I would be able to add hue and saturation to the skies and the ocean, and just go to town. Sometimes that's what you're going to have to do to make an exterior look good from inside. But, with that particular shot, I did not have time, and I was not about to waste my time. This looks like garbage to me. Stuff that looks like this is, I'll say it's unacceptable, but sometimes you just have to do it because there's not that much time, you know? Kind of the same thing with this shot. I mean, you can see the outside, right? But the patio ceiling, the patio walls, the floors, it's all really dark. I mean, look at the chairs and tell me that this looks good. It doesn't. It's dark. It's purple. It's oversaturated with purple. But, you know, most editors are not going to spend that much time to sit here and select individual objects and increase the brightness of individual objects and stuff like that. That's something that I like to do because it makes the image look so much better, right? I mean, the back of this sofa, the backs of these chairs out here on the lanai is so dark. And here's another problem. I even forgot to remove the tripod and my photographer's feet and legs. You know, that's something that I just didn't see. Of course, we can get away with it at this distance, which is pretty much what I was looking at when I was editing this. But, you know, when you really zoom in, you see the fine details, you know. That's when you really start to see inconsistencies and things like that. Again, it all comes down to time. How much time do you have? With this image, I wish I could have done a better white balance. I wish I could have reviewed it for a few minutes longer. Maybe my brain could have picked up on the fact that this was just a little bit too yellow, and it could have used a little bit more brightness and things like that. You know, but I'll keep saying it over and over. It's all about how much time you have. You know, how much time do you have to spend on these images? If you don't have that much time, then just go for a safe point, right? Go for something neutral. Don't spend a lot of time on a few of these images and then you realize that you're running out of time and then you neglect the other half of the images, right? Like, let's say you're editing this property and you spent 2 hours editing the first 6 photos and you made them all look perfect, but then you realize that you spent way too much time on them and now you have to rush through the other 6 photos and the other 6 photos end up looking like crap, right? Don't do that. Balance them, right? Make sure you've got that balance. So I'm just going to get through a few more of these. I don't know how many are left, but here's a couple aerial shots. And just coming back to the point of consistency, you can see what I mean. These aerial shots they're very simple, but they've got that neutral point, right? And they're all consistent. They all pretty much look identical. You can tell that I was the one editing them. It wasn't edited by multiple people, multiple editors and things like that, right? Looking at it now, I wish I could have added a little bit more brightness to the skies, maybe a little bit of brightness down here at the bottom, maybe made the water here in the middle pop out a little bit more. But overall, they're clean enough, they're consistent enough, and I think they're good enough to be sent out to the client, you know. Saturation, the hues, it's all pretty much the same thing. No matter what angle of these properties that we're looking at, it's all pretty much the exact same thing, right? And that's what you want to achieve with your editing. So here's another property. And this one came out, I think it came out pretty good, because it was a decent day outside. I wish I could have done a better white balance on this image, especially with the woods on the left-hand side. But you can see, we'll compare this image to this image, and you can see that the exteriors, they're basically identical, right? They look the same. The brightness and the contrast inside is the same. The brightness and the contrast and the colors, they're basically the same on the outside as well. That's what you want to go for. Yeah, here we go. I know I've got some exterior pool shots, and again, I'm just hammering the point home of how things need to be consistent and how you need to make them all look identical. And with these shots, I think I achieved that for the most part. This one's a little bit brighter. I think it looks better than these other two. These could use just a tad bit of brightness. But again, it's all about time. It's probably the 50th time that I've said that. It's all about how much time you have. We don't have all the time in the world to sit here and analyze these images on under a microscope. We have to do the best that we can with the time that we have. That's why it's so important to really get your workflow down. Nail your workflow, nail your techniques. That way you don't sit here and think about whether or not it's good enough. You're going to know whether it's good enough and whether or not there's still things that you have to adjust in your images. It's basically going to become instinct at a certain point. Once you do it long enough and you get enough experience and you have that understanding of what makes an image look good. What I see all the time with real estate photography companies and their editing is they don't really make their images look that great. Anybody can install Photoshop and they can learn how to use the pen tool. They can learn how to, do masking and things like that, but it takes a very thorough understanding and a very creative eye on what makes an image look good, right? What makes it visually pleasing to the mind and to a person's brain and to their eye. You want the images to be alive. You want them to be bright and colorful without looking ridiculous, right? You don't want to just crank up your sliders for your hue and saturation or your vibrance and try and paint in some pretty little rainbow across the screen. That's not what you're doing. But you want them to be alive, right? When somebody's eyes settles on these images, you want them to have that emotional response of, wow, that looks amazing. This home looks absolutely gorgeous. This property is beautiful. I want to go there and see it myself, right? And that response is, it's kind of my responsibility and it's kind of the photographer's responsibility to create that reaction from the people looking at these homes. Because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, the real estate agents and the clients are hiring us to basically sell their homes for them. That's why we have these jobs that we do. The agents and the homeowners are not hiring photographers and editors to take pictures of their homes so that they can put them in a photo album and look at them with their families. Nobody's doing that. Nobody is doing that. They're buying these photos because they need a high quality and consistent image. They need high quality, consistent photographs that are going to help sell the real estate properties. Nobody's buying these because they can look at pretty images of a nice $30 million home on the beach. Nobody's doing that, So always make your images come alive. That's what it's all about. Make your images speak for themselves, right? Work with good photographers if you're not the photographer. Make sure that the photographers are doing their job and that they have a good workflow with how they capture the photographs in the field, right? There's only so much you can do as an editor or a post-production artist. Half of the equation is the photographer out there getting the proper composition, getting the proper angles, using the flash properly, using a decent DSLR or whatever kind of camera you guys prefer, and putting it all together with post-production and editing and things like that. So there's a lot of things that have to go into these images to really make them come alive. Anybody can pick up a camera, but what's going to separate somebody that's okay from great is there's a lot of variables there, and you have to be in control of those variables, right? As you can see, these angles and the overall composition of the photographs themselves, not necessarily even the editing that I'm talking about right now. I'm talking specifically about the job that my photographer does with these shots is always excellent. He knows exactly where to stand. He knows what height to set the camera to. He basically does everything in the field to minimize any sort of error, right? So that by the time it gets into my hands, there's less work that needs to be done. I can spend more time editing and focusing on the images and making sure that the quality will be there by the time it gets sent out to the agents and things like that. So make sure that the photographers are doing everything in the field that they can to get the best results possible, And again, with these exterior shots, they're all pretty consistent, even the daytime versus the nighttime shot. I don't look at this and think two different people were editing this property. I look at this and I see, something that's basically identical. And that's a good thing, And that's really what we're going for here. It's just that consistency. And you can tell these properties were shot using the Nikon D750 and sometimes the D780, but most of the time we're using the D750. And I love the D750 because of the colors that it outputs, the colors that it produces, and the overall contrast that it creates with how it shoots, the camera body and the sensor itself. As I'm sure you can see by now, after looking through like 50 of these images with me, these images basically all look the same. They all have the same characteristics, not just because of the editing that I have, but because of the camera body that we're using. The Nikon D750 and 780, it produces a very consistent result, and it's very easy for me as an editor to edit those raw images from that Nikon D750 because it's a very safe camera to use in Camera Raw, because it maintains so much data in the raw images that when I bring it into Camera Raw, I have more flexibility with the sliders, right? Like the highlights, shadows, contrast, exposure, things like that. I can increase those sliders, and it's not going to result in a high amount of noise that's created onto the image. And it's going to maintain all of the desirable, desirable qualities that I want the images to have. So it's very easy for me as an editor to combine and composite those images together because of how good of a job the Nikon D750 does outputting those raw images. So always make sure that you have a very reliable DSLR or mirrorless body, whatever you're using. Make sure that it's something that you're comfortable with and that you really prefer. Something that I see photographers do a lot of is they'll buy camera equipment all the time, and they'll spend thousands of dollars experimenting with new lenses, new camera bodies. Don't do that. Go with what you know to be true and what will produce consistent results. I had a photographer that would do that all the time. He would buy all these different camera bodies. He would try Nikons, Canons. The guy was all over the place. And he would give me the raw images at the end of the day, and he would want me to edit them, and I would tell him these all look like crap. Go back to the Nikon that we were using because I need that consistency. I need consistency as an editor. You don't want things to be all over the board. You want to know what you're going to deal with when you get the next day's work in, right? You don't want stuff to be all over the board. You want to be able to produce consistent results like this. Like these two images are consistent. They're exactly the same, right? They're basically identical. And that's what you want. We have two different angles of the same lanai, and they look identical. Even the exteriors look identical. The outside view of the ocean and the palm trees, it's identical. That's what you want. It's so simple. Don't make it Don't make it complicated or overly complex. It's not something that's scientific that we have to analyze. They're very basic concepts. That's what I keep trying to stress is how basic this stuff is. Don't make it overly complicated or complex. You don't have to be the best and most creative person in the world to excel in this type of field. It helps if you have a very creative background, but in order to be good or even professional, it's not necessarily required. What is required is that you have an understanding of all these different qualities and different concepts and things like that. I mean, I've known people that got into photography that were doing very uncreative work, and after a few years, they really began to excel in photography after training them and helping them to understand the importance of things like composition, getting the right angles, how to use the camera properly, how to use the flash properly, so that it doesn't result in harsh shadows and reflections on mirrors and metals and things like that, right? Knowing how to use the flash properly so that you get a nice, bright, even image without the drawbacks of what a flash will typically produce, and things like that, right? So people can be trained on this, but if you do have a creative background, that's all the better. But what you really want to have to excel at this is the passion and the motivation for creating something that's great, right? Most people just want to do photography as a business. They just kind of want to get in and out, in and out, in and out, copy and paste, copy and paste. And those guys, from my experience, and I've worked with a lot of them, they stick around for a while, but eventually they get kind of burnt out, and their overall quality was never really there to begin with. And their quality starts to go down because at the end of the day, they don't really care about this stuff. And I'm not saying that you have to be married to your work or anything like that, but for me, I enjoy photography. I enjoy post-production, computer graphics, digital design, things like that. So if you have a background in that and you want to excel, you appreciate these things, art in general that's digital or even traditional and things like that, I think you're going to go a lot further than the average person that doesn't really have a creative background and that doesn't really care about this kind of stuff. There's a reason that I consider myself to be one of the best post-production artists out there and editors overall. It's because I really want to make things shine. I want to make things... at the end of the day, I just want to make a quality product, and that's what me and my photographers have been doing for over the last 10 plus years. And there's a reason that we've been able to stick around year after year, even through all the economic challenges and things like that. There's a reason that we have clients that have been with us for over 10 years, and it's because the relationships that they have with my photographers, and it's also a combination of the overall effort that I put into my images and my editing to make sure that the photographer's work looks as good as possible, right? If you can take the photos from the photographer and make them look as good as possible, that's going to look good on the photographer, that's going to look good on you from the photographer, and it's just going to create this cycle where things continue to get better, because the photographer's job is not just to capture the photos, it's to really build the brand of the company, because they're the ones that are out there showing their face every day to the clients. They're the ones that are having to schedule the shoots, meet with the homeowners and the agents, the clients and things like that. So if you can continue to build on this stuff as a foundation, it's only going to get better, and you're going to have clients that will stick with you for years and years and years, and they will come back to you. Even if you charge a higher premium, they know what they're getting with you, and that's quality and consistency. And that's why I always hammer that point home. Make things as consistent as possible and as high quality as possible, because you want people coming back, and you want to be the foundation for that real estate or architectural market in your area. You want to create and designate yourselves, the company itself, as the go-to people to sell a home or sell an architectural property or things like that, So always make things as consistent as possible, But hopefully I've done a decent job trying to illustrate that point of why it's so important to make things look the same, right? Make things bright, even with your images. Make sure that they always have enough contrast. Make sure that the white balance is good. And of course, your sharpening pass is always going to be key. Make sure that they're crisp and that you're sharpening all of your images and stuff like that as always. And, do a good job figuring out what kind of camera you and your photographers need to use. The reason that we've stuck with Nikon is because, again, all those qualities that I talked about earlier is because of how consistent the raw images the Nikons produce. That's just my opinion. I feel like they're much more consistent than the Canons when it comes to the colors. I feel like the colors are much more consistent and high quality than the Canons. But it all comes down to personal preference. As an editor and a photographer, whatever you think is going to get the job done and give the best results possible, then I could care less. It's all about what you need to get the job done. But at the end of the day, make sure that you're producing things that are consistent and that you're producing the highest quality results possible. And I think you'll go very, very far in this particular field.